The Royal Enfield Interceptor 650 is the most significant new motorcycle for India in 2018. Developed from scratch, these bring in a new era for the Royal Enfield brand itself, and at the center of interest is the 648cc parallel twin engine. They have paid special care to tune out the vibrations using a balancer shaft which takes away the primary vibrations and a 270-degree crank which takes away the secondary vibrations. However, this 270-degree crank does give this motorcycle a unique sound, which I'm sure you guys will enjoy. The company claims that this results in a smooth engine that we have never seen from Royal Enfield before, and something I really look forward to test out while riding the motorcycle. The air and oil-cooled engine makes 47 horsepower at 7,250 RPM and even a more impressive 52 Newton meters of torque at 5,250 RPM. They claim 80% of this torque is available at as low as 2,500 RPM. The power and torque is quite usable in the city riding condition. Enfield has developed a new double cradle tubular steel frame in collaboration with Tyres Performance Design. It looks like the one which was there in the Continental GT 535, but this is an all new frame, let me assure you that. Brakes are Bybre, and it's a single 320mm 2-piston caliper brake at the front and a 240mm disc at the back. And obviously the motorcycle gets dual channel ABS, which is great. The styling is authentic retro with the standard 41mm telescopic fork up front and a dual gas charge rear shock absorber. And even the wheels are 18-inch and not 17-inch as seen in modern motorcycles, so they've kept true to the retro image. The seat height of 804mm will be a big positive for shorter riders, and 1400mm of wheelbase looks like a balanced choice between straight line stability and agility. Moreover, the ground clearance height is 174mm and it's going to be an easy bike to tour with under bad road conditions. The seat is very long and there is ample room to sit a second person and a lot of space to mount luggage as well. On paper, it's impressive, but it was finally time to ride the motorcycle and experience it. Starting up for the first time on the Interceptor 650, right off the bat you feel that the engine is very muted. It just doesn't feel like other Royal Enfields. When we ride, we understand the vibrations a little bit more, but right now it feels absolutely smooth. Reminds me much of the Triumph's Bonneville Street Twin, but the engine sound is obviously different and I like it. It's very throaty and the feel of the twin cylinder is very apparent. Let's go. Right off the bat, the power comes in very nicely. It's a smooth power delivery. I wanted to go out with the feeling of how the feeling works, and I'm mighty impressed. It doesn't feel like a Royal Enfield at all. It feels much more like the Kawasaki motorcycles that I've ridden. Very smooth. The engine in the lower RPMs makes almost no noise. Engine braking is medium. It's not something too much. It has a slight amount of engine braking. Even the brakes, they lack the initial bite, kind of what I understand, but do have a good amount of feedback. And obviously I wanted to really launch this motorcycle and do some high-speed stuff, but as you can see, that would be risking a bit too much, especially on a brand new motorcycle. I want to tell you that the seat height is only 804mm. I don't know why, but the bike feels kind of high, specifically maybe because of the lower handlebars. Yes, the handlebars are not as high as a traditional Royal Enfield, and that does affect the sitting position. It's not 100% upright any longer. There is a certain amount of lean forward to it, which is just a 15-degree lean, which is much more like a naked bike's leaning forward position. And these are the things that I really like to cover as Ride with Rahul, because I know some of the reviewers will miss this, that this is no longer just a normal cruising riding position. So it does have a cutoff at around 8,000 RPM, 8,000 plus RPM, so it's not a very high revving bike,
and they want to tell you that the 80% of the torque that this motorcycle produces is available as low as 2,500 RPM, which is like, you know, having a lot of access to the power. Like 80% of 50 is around 40, so around 41 Newton meters of torque available right as low as 2,500 RPM, which is, you know, you'd be cruising over 2,500 RPM, trust me on that. So you would have a lot of access to the torque. So if you're carrying luggage, if you're moving uphill, that low end torque's gonna come in really important. This feels like a motorcycle that you could live with on a day-to-day basis, because we're doing city riding. And remember, this is oil and air cooled, and it's not a carbureted, and it's not a radiator cooled, liquid cooled motorcycle. So one of the facts that we would get to test out today is, within city riding conditions, whether this bike has a tendency to heat up. For now, I can say that it is not. And so the air and oil cooled, despite having that, this is not a highly tuned engine, so it's making 47 bhp or horsepower, and which is at 7,000 rpm, close to 7,000 rpm, and that's a reasonable amount of power. But it's a bigger engine making that smaller power, so the engine is kind of tuned in a more relaxed way, with a lot of care to the low and mid-range performance. What happens when you have a bike tuned up and wired like that is that you obviously stress out the engine a lot less. Cruising experience improves, vibration reduces, and also heating reduces. So those are the three advantages of having a bigger engine make smaller amount of power. One more thing that I noticed in the spec sheets was the rear tire, which was 130. Coming from a background of riding motorcycles with thick tires, and all the modern motorcycles have really wide tires, like 150 would be a minimum on such a motorcycle. A 130 is going to be an issue, and I do feel that riding this. I mean, whenever, you know, I'm tilting this bike into corners, this is not a very good handling motorcycle, because especially in the corners you would feel that. Now I am sure that you know, you can play around with the suspension, because the rear suspension has a 5-stage preload adjustment, and I'm sure that they have configured it to the softer setting for better, you know, plush feel, which most people prefer anyways. And I'd like to say that the front forks are not upside down, they're normal telescopic forks, which looks good as a retro motorcycle. It is more, you know, in tune with the retro styling, but dual gas charge shocks at the rear, and you can adjust the preload if you want more handling. However, I do feel that when I'm accelerating, the bike is not at its best composure. When I'm like opening up the throttle completely, there is a slight bit of, like, I can feel the rear end a little bit move out sort of a way, which you know, it is a longer motorcycle. Wheelbase isn't that long, 1400 millimeters, but the bike is kind of 50-50 sort of waist distribution. A center feels very heavy, and the front end is not that heavy, and that is apparent from the design itself. If you had wider tires on this bike, especially with you know, a 150 rear section, or at least a 140, the feel, the way the bike feels on the highway, and specifically at higher speeds, that would improve greatly. Obviously it would affect the mileage adversely, but I think when you're riding a 650cc motorcycle, you should always go for wider, thicker tires and softer compounds. So with Pirelli, we can be sure that the compound is soft, but that thickness leaves something to be desired. And moving on to the seating comfort, it's a narrow seat, so that's something that's moving away from the Royal Enfield tradition, because usually Royal Enfield motorcycles, they have wide, really sofa-like seats, and this one is not like that at all. It's firmer, believe it or not. It's a lot narrower, and whereas being narrow does help, because even if you're a shorter rider, you can put both your feet down very easily. But as it has been become narrower, the comfort level has gone down a tad bit from other Royal Enfield motorcycles. If you're a taller rider, there is a lot of room for you to move back and position yourself accordingly. I am perched right up on the tank, but you have the option to adjust yourself and do a much better job if you're a taller rider. So despite the bike being made friendly for shorter riders, a taller rider can step back and make it a lot better. It's around 3 lakhs. So people are recognizing the new bike. That's a very good price point. I mean, I really didn't want to spoil it right in the middle of the video. I was going to talk about it in the end of it. But think of it. A 650cc twin cylinder motorcycle which feels absolutely, vibration free, has decent amount of performance, very good amount of torque. So it has a 13.7 liters of fuel tank capacity, which is around, I was taking it around to be around 325 kilometers of range. But when you think about it, at the 13.7 liters of fuel's weight, it comes to around 212 kg for the curb weight with fully fueled, and even that is not a big number for a retro bike. I know when you're comparing it with a sport bike or something like that, it's coming up quite high, but think of the other 650cc motorcycles. They are around 200 kgs and they're not retro. So for being retro, you have more metal, you can go an extra 10 kgs. It doesn't really matter as long as you have the performance to not make this motorcycle feel slow. And this motorcycle does not feel slow when you accelerate. As you can see, when I'm accelerating, it's got a lot of go because of the low end torque. Whenever you open up the throttle, you have it. Even if you are in the wrong gear, you don't really need to shift up and down that much. That's always there, and that's something that I really enjoy. This bike has an early limiter. It's not a high revving engine, so you have to keep that in mind. And I mean, I don't know why, but the constant reminder is of the Triumph's Street Twin, and which is, I think, around 3 times the price of this motorcycle. But at least in the way this bike's delivering the power, it makes me feel that. Obviously that bike was tiny bit more powerful, tiny bit more refined, believe it or not, and it had a traction control system. Handling was also better, but that's 3 times the price, and this one is reminding me of that bike in a lot of ways. And at the price this is coming, I don't think anybody can beat this bike. I mean, a lot of people might think that this is okay, this might be outperformed by the other single cylinder naked bike that we all know and love, but this isn't about just that. I think on a highway, if you add in a little bit of taller screen, this bike has way better potential to do 2-up touring, a lot of more space for luggage, and that's gonna matter to a lot of people, including me. If I was to do a tour, and specifically on highways, and I haven't ridden this on off-road, but Royal Enfields have always done well in off-roads. Like that's been there. If they can just take care of the unreliability issues, they can do a lot better actually. And this bike does feel different from others. The fit and finish seems to have improved. Not much to talk about the plastics quality. It's not really that good, but it'll do. It's not horribly bad or anything. It's like what you expect on other commuter bikes, not like a premium bike finish. But the paint, the handlebars, the meter, or the console, whatever you want to call it, that's definitely there. A bit of a digital feel in there that has trip meters, your fuel meters and everything. But the Speedo and the Taco both are analog. And on a retro bike, that is the way to go. I definitely feel that. So overall, this motorcycle has been impressive, superbly impressive. Now the clutch, this is having a slipper clutch, and it's a bit harder than other slipper clutches that I've used. It has a nice feel to it, but it's slightly harder to operate. And for the first time in the history of Royal Enfield motorcycles, they have used a counterbalancer to take out the vibrations, and first time they have used a 6-speed transmission. It's a 1 down 5 up, just like whatever we use in every other motorcycle we ride. So that's obviously a great thing, because to take the advantage of a 650cc motor, they had to design an all new gearbox. So nothing about this bike has been taken from previous generations of Royal Enfield. The engine's new, the frame is new, the gearbox is new, the suspension is new, and even the consoles are new. Haha, U-turn on a 650cc engine. It feels just so easy to do that. So that's it for me. That's the Royal Enfield. I'm really impressed, but I really want to take this motorcycle out to the highway. We would put a request and we will see how that goes. But for now, I hope you guys understood this motorcycle. I'm going to talk about a few of the downsides and go over to the final conclusion afterwards of this. So stay tuned, and if you have not hit the subscribe button, please hit it. Also, make sure to hit the bell button right next to it.
The Royal Enfield falls behind in certain areas. The rear Pirelli is a bit too narrow and might lead to a loss of composure on wet roads or at high speeds, especially in cornering. The suspension is a bit on the softer side, and those who have ridden on upside down forks and a rear monoshock will miss that experience. The brakes are also a tad too less to stop this relatively heavier motorcycle, especially since this is capable of speeds of over 170 km per hour. Yes, you heard that right. The Royal Enfield Interceptor's 650 top speed is 170 km per hour. A twin disc setup at the front would have been highly appreciated. Another thing that you might look at is this is air and oil cooled. There is no radiator, though for today's test the thing did not heat up at all, but more tests are required before we come to the final conclusion. At 2.9 lakhs, this motorcycle is uniquely positioned in the Indian market. There is nothing that can compete with this motorcycle or offer a similar experience at the same price. The nearest alternatives are the Harley Street 750 and the Bonneville Street Twin from Triumph, which are priced almost 2 to 3 times more. Yes, this is not as powerful as those bikes and maybe have a little less electronics than the Street Twin, but this is just as practical, and for a lot of people this opens up the opportunity to own a big displacement motorcycle with decent highway performance, and that is the reason I love the Interceptor 650. Today we are here at Vishnu Oil Company Royal Enfield, and this is on BT Road near Kolkata, Dunlop stop. So if you are in and around Kolkata and you want a test drive, they have the Interceptor 650 for a test drive. This Continental GT 650 is not for test drive, but you can take a look. They have a display motorcycle here. 650 they have for test drive, the Interceptor one. So you can come in for a test drive. You can call this number to book the motorcycle, or you can come for the test drive, and afterwards if you are impressed, you will book this bike, and I give you a guarantee that you will be impressed, because this is a really nice motorcycle.